Good morning, everybody. This is Jay Nadler. I'm going to be your host today. And just so you know, unfortunately, GoToWebinar seems to be having some problems. So unfortunately, there's no cameras. You just get to see our screens. So I want to thank everybody for coming. On behalf of Lindsay, Graham, Blake, Waddell, and myself, we really appreciate that you are here. Today's session comes from hearing too many stories about problems people and companies have had with their cybersecurity. Most of us have a computer with programs and files and someone to call if it breaks. Most people do not know how easy it is to protect yourself, your data, and your clients. I use a service called Managed IT. It's a very reasonable cost to protect my data and systems at the highest level possible and to have access to teams of people if something goes wrong. In theory, if I'm hit with ransomware, I can be up and running again pretty fast at no additional cost. We want all of you to know about these services. The session today is designed to do just that. As I said, cameras are off, mics are also off. We were hoping that it would be more conversational, but again, GoToWebinar, we have some limitations. For today, please use the chat button to submit questions. Lindsay Gibson will be watching the chat and she will ask the questions as they come up. I want to thank BBD for providing the hosting network today. In case we have some attendees here today who are not members of CGIB, they need to go to cgib.ca to learn more. If you are experienced at group benefits or new to the field, there's more information out there than anyone can ever know. A membership at CGIB means that you'll get the education you need to move from being a broker to being a solid advisor. It also means that if you ever have questions that you are unsure of, you'll be able to find an answer. Membership is well worth the investment. Our session is NGBM, which stands for National Group Benefits Meeting. We're now online on LinkedIn. Please link with us to keep abreast of the programs we're planning. It's our goal to provide at least 4 sessions per year. 2 sessions per year will attempt to answer your questions. The other 2 sessions are meant to help better protect you, your business, and your clients. Attendance is no charge. Our aim is to have content for you that is always relevant, engaging, and educational. If you know any advisors who need any support, please have them connect on LinkedIn and send us an email to get added to our email list. So for today, Jamie from ProServe IT will be our first presenter. He'll be speaking on how you can better protect yourself in a world where cybersecurity is affecting more people and companies every day. Blake Waddell from Waddell Insurance Brokers will present on how you can use insurance to help protect yourself and your business. Gavin Mosley from Mosley Group will present on what happens if you do not protect yourself properly. So Jamie, if you can show your screen, please. Jamie McMahon is the Chief Technology Officer for ProServe IT, which is a consulting organization that helps organizations unlock their digital future. Jamie has spent years in the technology field working with both enterprise and small business to fuel growth through digital transformation. He has delivered talks through North America hosted by Microsoft, Facebook, VMware, and a broad range of technology solutions. His passion is to help democratize technology and shift thinking around technology from cost-centric into an enabler that provides positive business outcomes. Most people know managing cyber risk needs to be a priority that requires the same attention as other aspects of their business. Cybersecurity is often presented in a way that's very technical, creating confusion and a lack of clarity. This presentation hopes to change that for you. The purpose of this conversation is to explain cybersecurity to provide actionable and practical guidance. Jamie likes his presentations to be more conversational. Unfortunately, as I said, we don't have conversation today, so we have the chat. So please, as your questions come up, just ask them and Lindsay will be asking the questions for you. Jamie, the air is yours.
Perfect. I appreciate the intro, very kind. And I'm just going to do a real quick check since we're having not tech issues, but I just want to validate, can we all see my screen?
We can see your screen, but it's only a portion of the screen. If you can make it larger, that might be good.
Okay.
So you can see your whole screen, but your whole screen is small. Maybe that's just me.
I see it as large.
Okay, great. It's just me.
And so it's my slides that are up, correct?
And you know, we do have to comment on that. We're doing a session on technology and we are having technology problems.
It's Murphy. Murphy always gets us.
Jamie, take it away.
Perfect. Awesome. All right. So as alluded to, we are here to talk about managed IT and cybersecurity. I appreciate you offering me the opportunity to speak to you. My name is Jamie. I promise I won't talk very much about myself, if at all. But I do have, kind of been in the trenches, so to speak. Have seen a lot of horror stories unfold as it relates to technology and specifically recently cybersecurity. And so I do think that this is a really important topic for us as business leaders, as business owners, to really take seriously and understand, what are the things that we need to do to protect our business, protect our family, and really just be good digital citizens. So with that, kind of a little bit of an agenda for today. We'll be going through and talking about cybersecurity. We'll be talking about managed IT, and I think most importantly, what my commitment to you is that we'll offer, I'll try to create an actionable list, something that we can actually hopefully influence or begin doing inside of your business to help protect you at the end of the session. If you do have any questions, I see a number of comments into the question panes. Please feel free to comment. I will try and engage real time as much as is possible, understanding the limitations of the technology. And obviously, as alluded to, we'd prefer to have this in a more conversational format, but I'll try my best to incorporate any questions into the natural dialogue. So why do we talk about this? And I think, sometimes it's one of those things where we kind of know that cybersecurity is an issue. We know that people get hit, but we don't really know, like it's kind of hidden until it's not. That's really been what I've seen. We see, people like Desjardins, we see people like, really big organizations that are hit, but what does that mean for me? I'm not Desjardins, I'm not some big organization. Is this really a concern for me? And I can tell you unequivocally, the answer is yes. On average, each organization faces 186 cyber attacks per year. So that's almost one every other day, or about one every other day. And that's, organizations big and small. And that, and I get the question, okay, well, why? If I'm just, if I'm a 10-person employee, like why am I a target, for example, for a cyber criminal? And I will kind of hopefully help to answer those questions, because I think it is a good question, but I promise you that there are very, very few people that are exempt from this, and it is rather unfortunate. That being said, there is light, there are things that we can do to help protect us, and that's what we'll talk about. So what are those concerns, and what do we see when we talk to organizations and people about this? I think first and foremost, it's all around protecting our people and protecting our data. And the people is obviously the people that we work with. If that's just ourselves, it's obviously ourselves, but obviously all of our colleagues and people that we have close relationships, we want to make sure that they're safe. We also want to make sure that we're protecting our customer data. I mean, we all have fiduciary and other responsibilities to make sure that we're not compromising the integrity of any data that we host, and so that's of utmost important. If there is any product or IP that you represent or that you sell, obviously we want to make sure that does not get into unwanted hands. And finally, if you have any intelligent processes, things that make you unique, these are all things that criminals will look for. And I have on the right here is actually kind of more on the personal side. And there's a reason I'm kind of, for this talk, I'm going to mingle, so to speak, the corporate and personal, because in today's day and age, there's a very big overlap between your corporate digital presence and your personal digital presence. Tools like LinkedIn, for example, have really begun to blur the lines over, is LinkedIn a corporate tool? Is it a social tool? Do we use our corporate email accounts, for example, to log in, or using a Gmail? And it's those types of conditions, I think, that create that blurring, where it really becomes important to also protect our personal identities. And so on the right, from an individual perspective, it is, as I mentioned, protecting your identity. It's also protecting your family members. We all have vulnerable people in our lives, either our parents or our young children that probably do, we all learn from mistakes. And I think the unfortunate thing nowadays in the digital world is mistakes are almost forever. And so how can we help them avoid making those mistakes in the first place just given the permanence of the internet and the permanence of technology. And of course, finally, we do want to protect our finances. I think the worst thing that can happen is something like identity fraud, where someone goes and gets a mortgage in your name, and obviously there's some pretty significant negative consequences for that. So what can we do to protect ourselves? So I asked this question: how has your security perimeter changed? And I know this is maybe a very technical phrase, but it's relevant in the sense that there are opportunities to improve this. I think once upon a time, whether we work in an office or we work from home, it's really difficult to, or it was really easy at once upon a time to install antivirus, have a firewall, and be very comfortable that would keep me safe. And I think there is some validity to that to an extent, but I'm going to describe how maybe that's changed with an analogy to this picture that you see here, which is a castle called Beban. It's in Northern England, and it's a good analogy or good scenario, I think, to describe the modern day and age. So this castle, you can see it's quite impressive looking. It's got very tall walls. The walls itself are also very thick. It's well supplied. It sits on the ocean. There's kind of only one way in, one way out. And so for centuries, this was basically the pinnacle of security in medieval England and medieval Europe. This castle was not compromised until the War of the Roses. And for those that are familiar with their European history, the War of the Roses was one of the first times where really they created and effectively used a combination of two technologies, that being gunpowder and actual cannons. And through that advance in technology, they basically rendered all of this investment in the thickest of walls, the best design, and with one technology invention, it kind of made all of that investment no longer worthwhile, because people could just roll up cannons and knock down the walls. This is a very similar analogy to what we see today. And I think if we all think about, going back 10 years where we probably just had a laptop or a desktop even at that time, we had all of our stuff stored on our drive, really to protect ourselves, we would just build a wall around our machine and that would be good enough. However, in today's day and age, all of our data, which is really where the value sits, is all over the place. We all probably have multiple devices. We have cell phones, we've got iPads, we've got laptops, we've got desktops, we've got multiple services that we use, Dropbox, Google, Microsoft, all sorts of services. We have, an office perhaps where we work, or shared service or shared working places. We all, especially in the last year, have spent a lot of time at home. And, it's through that type of decentralization, so to speak, of where our actual assets are, that makes it so that if we just have a firewall on our machine and antivirus that works, that's no longer good enough to actually protect where our data sits, which is effectively everywhere. So in this decentralized model, what can we do to actually effectively protect ourselves? Because I think all of us can probably resonate or appreciate kind of this picture, at least from the sense where, all of your data and all of your assets are all over the place. Terrence, I do see a few questions in there. I will address some of them, some good suggestions there, and I will promise I will get through and answer some of these kind of in the flow, so to speak, as we get through things. So there's lots of news about this, and I think, probably from a Canadian perspective, there's a little bit of a disservice from the media, where all of the posts, all of the news articles around cybersecurity tend to be, like I mentioned, really big businesses, and they tout, really large numbers around what the cost of a breach is. It's going to be $3 million if you if you have a cyber attack. And I think that's a number that's probably unrealistic for most Canadian businesses, given that, most Canadian businesses are actually less than 20 employees. right? They may not even be doing $3 million of business in a year. But what we do see is that the average cost of a breach for the average Canadian company, so when you're thinking about an SMB or small medium business organization, it can be north of $200,000, $250,000. And depending on how large you are, that is a really significant bill to pay for something that we can probably prevent. And obviously that bill does not include additional costs, let's say in terms of lost business or in terms of damage to reputation. And I know we're going to hear a story later around what some of the actual impact can be from a breach, but just in terms of straight dollars and cents, we're talking 6 figures is the norm, and for very small organizations, it tends to be in the $40,000 to $50,000. So no matter which way you slice it, it's a big problem, and it's a pain that we would rather avoid. The other thing that I will say is the second number here where it talks about 229 days. So that's kind of a weird number, because when you think about it, what that is saying is there's 229 days between when someone has infiltrated, or let's say hacked into your environment, and when they're either detected or they perform some intentional action to take advantage of the fact that they have access to your environment. And if you want to think about that in real terms, that would almost be like someone had broken into your house and they went and hid themselves in the closet in your basement for 3/4 of the year and only came out then to steal your TV or steal your wedding ring or some other valuable asset. It's crazy. But that's what technology can allow inside of your business, and that's what's kind of normal. Because cybercrime is a business, they will focus their efforts on where they can get the biggest return for their investment, i.e., if they feel that the best way for them to make money off of compromising your business is by, waiting and checking to see if you've got a big deal coming up, or if you're doing business with a large client or a large organization, they will take those types of opportunities to pounce and leverage because they know that you're more likely to act because of those external pressures. And so it is very important that we be proactive about this and that we know, what's going on. So I figured, what's a webinar without a few charts? And what we've seen, I think I've saw some data somewhere that, for example, with the, with the rise of COVID and people working from home, a lot of these cyber attacks sometimes work in like kind of factories, so to speak, or digital factories overseas in various different countries, and that, with people being forced remote, that has been a decrease in cyber attacks. And that's actually the opposite. What we've seen specifically with cybercrime is that with COVID, there's actually been an increase in attacks, and they will actually, again, use external events to take advantage. And so, for example, from a timeline perspective, this is a US-centric chart, but actually the data correlates quite closely with Canada. That describes, for example, the increase in cyber attacks correlates to some fairly significant milestones around what happened with the pandemic last year. And they were taking advantage of those, for example, to send emails that would be alleged or impersonating real medical information, but in fact, they were not medical information. Obviously, they were trying to get access to your system or learn about your credentials or some other thing. And this is common. And we're seeing this now as well with organizations and businesses returning to work, businesses returning to normal. They're taking advantage of those same types of cues to use social engineering and say, hey, return to work, come read about these policies or come read about these changes, and they'll leverage those as an opportunity to attack. So these criminals do take advantage of social norms of psychology, of things that are going on in the world to take advantage of you.
Jamie, before you go on to the next slide, there is 2 questions, or maybe a question and a comment. The question is, Israel has extensive experience with cybersecurity. Do you have access to Israel knowledge?
Yes. Actually, funny enough, I was in Israel, in Herzliya, just north of Tel Aviv, last year in January with for 5 days as part of the Microsoft. They've got a large think tank there tied to security. A lot of the large multinational organizations actually have their cybersecurity R&D sit in Israel, as actually is alluded to there by that comment. So yeah, I did spend and have spent time in Israel learning about a lot of the stuff and speaking with peers and colleagues in this space. So some of this stuff is obviously influenced by things that I've learned and conversations that I've participated in as a result of having the opportunity to go overseas, and obviously lucky that it happened just before the pandemic.
That's awesome. There's also I think just a suggestion where Terrence is saying change passwords monthly automatically because clients tend to not remember to change their passwords.
Yep, that's a great suggestion. I will talk, I think, a little bit about some password best practices and some things that you can do to help, I'll say, ease the burden of password management or ease the burden of just passwords in general, because I think they're very, over time they've become more complicated than they need to. And unfortunately, what that's meant is, for example, businesses creating password complexity requirements. What that does is actually trains humans to create difficult passwords. And as humans, difficult passwords then become difficult to remember. So we tend to fall back to common patterns so that they are easier for us to remember. But the problem is, if we're going to create patterns in our passwords, then actually makes it easier for computers to guess based on algorithms and other things that they're doing. And so there are some things we can do to kind of reverse that trend. So instead of having passwords that are hard for humans and easy for computers to guess, what are some things that we can do to basically reverse that and make it hard for computers but easy for humans? And I'll talk about that a bit. But
That's
good
great.
comment and good suggestion.
And actually, just one more question before you move on. Do you recommend password managers such as 1Password?
Yep, that's a great question. Actually, that's in my action list, if you will. So I will answer that one specifically, and I've got some content that speaks to that. So I'll probably defer that one, and if I don't actually answer the question, or if there's a follow-up question, I'll suggest we kind of parking lot that one until we get to that section, if
Perfect.
that makes sense.
That's it for now.
No, I appreciate that, and I'm glad we're getting some questions. As I said, this is for you. And so if there's anything that you feel that is relevant or information that you need to know, then I'd be happy to answer to the best of my ability. Okay, 2 more slide data, and I'm just using this to illustrate a point. Back in the day, we all used to put on, antivirus because, for example, we were worried about ransomware. And while ransomware is still a threat, of course, you can see here the trend lines. Both the left is basically a global trend line. The right is specifically inside of Canada. So the data has been sanitized and just for Canadian data, the trend line is actually a downward trend. So people and criminals are using ransomware less to attack us versus, and again, unsurprising, they've been using phishing and email way more, dramatically more, and it increases every quarter by quarter, and it's probably evident by the spam and other things that clutter your inbox from people alleging to be who they are not, or sending you content that's actually malware or something like that in disguise. So understanding that it's phishing, that the old ways are shifting, what can we do and what to look out for? So it's important. I alluded to this before. I'm just going to blow this slide out so you can kind of get a sense for this. It's a busy slide, and where I'm going to focus your attention on, I think, is just right here, on the right. And this is where we talk about the intersection of personal and private. So cybercrime, cyber criminals, it is a business. They're going to put their money and their efforts where they spend the lowest amount of money for the highest return. And you can see here that it's actually pretty cheap to do a number of things. So for example, the compromised accounts. It costs on average less than $1 to purchase 1,000 compromised accounts on the internet. And so what is that? What is a compromised account? So a compromised account would be an account that's included in a public compromise. So I alluded to Desjardins, there's been others, Starwood, and lots and lots of companies. I don't need to list them all here. We can all find examples of this. LinkedIn is another good one where it's a very public compromise quite a while ago now. But what those accounts do is those compromised accounts all sit in a database that exists on the dark web. The dark web is really just a scary place that's, it's a negative name for places where criminals go to get this type of information, where there's kind of like a black market. And these compromised accounts, I can go and find, let's say myself, Jamie McMahon. If I have a LinkedIn account and my LinkedIn account was part of a hack or a compromise from a couple of years ago, someone can go and buy my username and password, which is probably my corporate email address and my password to LinkedIn, for me and 999 other people like me for less than $1, really, really cheap. And again, as I mentioned to the psychology, because of how passwords are difficult to remember, I'm almost rewarded by having easy passwords to remember. And what that probably means is I don't have many passwords. The average is that most people have between 3 and 4 passwords they use for all of the tools, systems, etc. that they use. So email, banks, things like Air Canada, rewards things, Apple, Google, Alexa, all of those, between all of those accounts that we all invariably create, we probably have a pattern and 3 or 4 passwords that we use. Again, that's what the data says. So then the odds are, of those 1,000, maybe a number of us have changed our passwords over time, but probably there's maybe 10% or even 1% of those people that have not. And for $1, you can see how that's a really good return. I can go and find someone's account for less than $1, compromise them, and if my average return on that is even $10,000, that's a crazy return on my investment as a criminal if I'm looking at it from that perspective. So this is why this is so prevalent. This is why criminals follow these types of patterns, is because it's easy, it nets a very large return. And I mean, you can see some of the other services here that I didn't talk about, where it's cheap. It is very cheap, $66 for ransomware, or this affiliate model, which is crazy, right? They're businesses where criminals, they will write ransomware for you and they won't even charge you for it. They're just going to ask for a cut of the profit, which is, i.e., the cut of how much ransom they get from people that pay them in Bitcoins or other type of currency. And so this is it's a real threat, and it's something that we need to be protective of. So I mentioned this here on the bottom right, 80% of individuals only use 3 or 4 passwords across all of their accounts. And actually, I'm gonna make a guess. I'm gonna guess that most of the folks here on the line, you have a few passwords you use. You might have a normal version of that password, which is maybe a word. I'm just gonna say the word is cell phone, a silly password. And some of us will have a complex version of the password that probably begins with just a capital. If it requires a number, that number will be the number 1, and that number 1 will be the last number in the password. And if that password requires a complex character, it's probably an exclamation mark. And again, that exclamation mark is the last character of the password. So this is a really good example of where we think we're making passwords more complex. But I mean, if I'm a computer and I know that most people have capitals as their first letter, and most people have numbers and special characters as their last characters, and that most people use the number 1 and the exclamation mark, why even have people have these passwords, right? They're the illusion of security. They're not actually security. So I'll talk about some suggestions and some recommendations that we can do there. This is why you'll see on the left here, 81% of all hacking-related breaches use compromised credentials. This is why all of the spam and the email accounts or attacks happen in the way they do, is because once they have your password, if we want to use our analogy of the castle, they basically have the keys to your kingdom. They can just walk through all of your fancy walls, all of your fancy moat and your hills and everything, because they have the key. They can walk in through and just take whatever they want. And so it's really, really important that in today's digital world, we protect our identity, we protect our username and password, and we treat this really seriously. And unfortunately, when we fall victim to a phishing attack, 15%, which is actually a large percentage, fall victim a second time. Kind of scary. Okay, so before I get to the next one, I will actually speak to this because I think there was a suggestion earlier around passwords. So maybe I'll just take this opportunity to talk about this. If my camera is working, I would show you a really cool book from my daughter. It's If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. And it's just got some funny pictures on it, but I'm using this to illustrate a point. The trend that we're seeing in passwords is to move away from passwords and move towards something called passphrases. And the way that we develop a passphrase is as humans, the thing that becomes easiest for us to remember isn't words, but actually pictures. And so I was just going to use this children's book to illustrate a point. Most of the time, what I use is I'll use a family picture from Christmas or some other event of a picture that I know I will never forget. And I will identify specific items in that picture that probably I know that no one else would know, unless you're staring at my wall. And I'll say, in this instance, it's, cookie, mouse, bell bottoms, right? And if I stick those three words together, that becomes my passphrase. That password or passphrase is very long, i.e. it's very hard for computers to guess. Cookie, mouse, bell bottoms is not in any dictionary. So it's something that will be very difficult for them to just guess other than just by brute forcing it. And because it's a picture and because I know that picture, it actually becomes very easy for me to remember. So the suggestion from a password complexity perspective is, shift away from passwords, shift towards passphrases, and find some of those things like pictures and stuff that have a good visual memory for you to use as the blueprint to build a password. Okay. So moving on. So if all of this sounds complex, and to an extent it can be, I do want to talk, and I wanted to make sure I described managed IT and why managed IT is important, and then I'll get into the actual action list. So I have this checkerboard, if you will, or chessboard up here that kind of shows a lot of the things that from an IT perspective, we probably need to do if we're doing our job. And if this looks like there's a lot, it is, right? And I think for most of the folks here on this call, this probably isn't what you're good at, nor how you make money. This is probably a tax. And the idea is, if we leveraged managed IT, if we leverage people that this is what they do, can we take away a lot of those taxes so that we as business leaders can really just focus on our business, right? And I think that's the idea, is how do we remove some of these technology taxes? Still be aware of them. Awareness and education is important, but I think a lot of the stuff that we don't need to do, or we do just because we feel we have to, there are alternatives to take away so that we can have a higher return on time for what we're spending on which includes security, like I said, which is important. So here's where we get into the checklist, and hopefully where we, there's some things here that will provide value to you. So number one, first and foremost, it's important that you know what your corporate data crown jewels are. What is it that someone, like what makes you valuable? If I'm a criminal, why do I want access to you? In most instances, it's probably not to you, it's to people that you work with. So your corporate crown jewels may be your customer list, or it may be your relationships. And can they inherit trust? For example, if they get access to your account, could they then email the people that you have a trusted relationship with? And can those criminals use that inherited trust to have that relationship send you money or create a bank account or something like that? So it's important to know what is it that's going to be valuable for a criminal. The second is creating your corporate and personal security and password standards. So I alluded to this, I described kind of shifting away from password standards. Actually, the international security standards even suggest no longer having password expiry anymore, because again, what most people do is they have a password, and when it's time to change their password, because it's it's 90 days or whatever the case may be, let's say their password was blue mouse, and the next time they do it, it's blue mouse 1, then blue mouse 2, then blue mouse 3. So really, we're not even changing our password. It's back to the illusion of security. So move to passphrases, and I'm not suggesting you turn off the password renewal mechanism. It's still a good practice. There's other things you can do, but I'm just kind of giving you an example of why there are some recommendations where it doesn't make a ton of sense at times to change your password consistently. If there's one recommendation that you can do to really make a big impact, it's this one. It's enable corporate and personal multi-factor authentication. And so what this means, I think most of us probably nowadays have more exposure to this than we would have even imagined a couple of years ago. But basically, this is whenever you log into a service, that service is going to send you a text message, or they're going to phone you, and that text is going to have a PIN. And when you put in your username and password, you also need to put in that PIN to verify that you are who you are. And this is because, as again, modern day, we probably all treat our cell phones as more valuable than our wallets even, right? If we left the house without our wallet in the morning, we'd probably continue to go to work. If we left our house without our phone in the morning, most of us are probably turning around and going back home and picking up our phone. And so if we have some way to multi-factor against our phone, it's usually a good sign that it's authenticating that you are who you are. And this prevents most identity attacks. So if someone gets access to your bank, or gets access to your password, but they can't, for example, do a bank transfer without multi-factor authentication, and that multi-factor authentication is tied to your phone, you've effectively prevented them from actioning or performing damage, and gives you an opportunity to reset your password or to actually correct the breach. Okay, this one is new and maybe something to think about. It's protecting your SIM cards. So I actually just mentioned it before. Phones are, one of the most personal things you own. It's a great way to identify who you are, and criminals have learned this. And so one of the things that they've been doing is that they will go to Rogers, so they'll go to TELUS, they'll have a new phone with them and say, hi, my name is John Doe. I dropped my phone in the lake on the weekend. Can I buy a new phone? And can you transfer my phone number to my new SIM card? Here it is. And they will, try to impersonate you. And when you think about the types of information that many phone companies, for example, might use to authenticate you, what's your birthday, where do you live? This is all stuff that's actually probably not very hard to find, right? I'm sure everyone has a Facebook account. Everyone wishes you happy birthday on your Facebook, on your birthday, so that most people can guess what your birthday is. They can go on LinkedIn and say, when you graduated high school, for example, when you graduated school. It's very easy from that to say, okay, what year were you born, and correlate the year you were born to where your birthday is, and boom, they have that private information. And then your address, again, that's also, I don't need to probably create lots of examples of how easy it would be to find where you live. And with that two pieces of information, it then becomes very easy to impersonate you. So what can you do? The recommendation here is to call your phone company or work with your phone company and put a password. And usually that's like a PIN or something, so that anytime you're going to do a SIM change, you're required to put in that password to have that PIN. And this is both if you have a personal cell phone or if you have a separate corporate phone. This is a very strong recommendation because we've seen this happen. And for whatever reason, this happens more with people that have digital wallets. So if there's any, Bitcoin traders on the phone or anything like that, for whatever reason, those people are targeted more than anyone else to try and get access to their phone. Again, because of who you are and what you have, and your crown jewels in that instance is probably more valuable because I can quickly get access to your digital wallet. Okay, this is in relation to the question about password managers. Yeah, we do recommend using corporate and personal password safes, KeePass, 1Password. There's a number of them that are on the market. These are just two. Obviously, you want to pick one that's reputable. I do know and trust both of these. There are pros and cons to using either, but it's a good way to help us keep our lives in order. to have a place. And again, as long as we have that one password that to get into the password safe that we know is incredibly complex, that only I know, or maybe we write it down or something like that for our loved ones in the event of an unfortunate incident. But we need to make sure that we have backups to that. But using the password safe is a good idea. Identity monitoring solutions. So this is both corporate and personal. And actually for both credit and identity. So most of the credit, Equifax and others have credit monitoring facilities, and you can actually also subscribe to identity alerts. And then there are other providers that provide both, that will do both credit and identity monitoring services for you. This is relatively cheap. It's like $80 a year in most instances, maybe as much as $100 a year. But again, when you think about what this can prevent, to me, that's well worth the investment. Okay, I've got questions here. I see them coming in. What are key things you look for when determining a password safe is reputable? So I look for two things. One, where is that data stored? And two, am I familiar with the company that is ultimately the one that owns that company? So I think 1Password, I don't remember if that one's Symantec or McAfee. But ultimately, if you figure out who owns that company and you trust that company, it's a publicly traded company, for example, it probably is some inherited trust there, and maybe they're not the safest, but at least there's still always ramifications if they get compromised, and they tend to be safer, let's say, than some startup who you may not be able to, you don't know how secure they are. The one that I use is KeePass. And the reason I use KeePass is because I can actually store the database anywhere I want. So I store the database in OneDrive, and because my database is in OneDrive, I've actually separated it from the password safe company. So it's now I trust Microsoft to not have my OneDrive compromised, and then I use the KeePass application to access my database which sits in the OneDrive. But those are just a couple of tips. The second question is Norton Password Vault and Apple keychains, are they good? Okay, so password vaults and keychains, I'm assuming specifically we're talking about two things. So one, password vaults that happen on web browsers, or in Norton's instance might be integrated with a web browser, or Apple's keychain that exists on your iPhones as a way to save them. They are good. I quote unquote trust them. I know that the like Apple's, for example, it uses the strongest form of encryption to do it. And at the end of the day, for someone to take advantage of that keychain, they'd actually need to get access to your Apple account. So as long as you have some of these best practices adopted in your Apple account, then I would, i.e. multi-factor authentication as an example, then I would trust it. Because, those large tech organizations, Facebook, Microsoft, Google, Apple, Amazon, they all spend lots and lots of money to protect their accounts because they know the damages to them if we all of a sudden, all of us stopped trusting Apple because they had some massive security breach. You can imagine the damage that would do to Apple as a business. So they spend a lot of money protecting those accounts. And so usually, those types of large technology firms are good bets to trust. Microsoft especially, they're actually, besides the Department of Defense, them and Facebook are the two most attacked organizations in the world. Facebook for Facebook and Microsoft actually for Xbox, funny enough. Okay. Actionable, perform a self-search. So there's a website called Have I Been Pwned? This is basically, it's a public database of public breaches. And so you can go and put both your personal and your corporate email addresses in there. It does not ask you for a password. If it asks you for a password, you're probably on the wrong site. Never put in your password into a public website. But if you're just putting in your email, what it will do is it will actually search and see if your email is part of any public compromises that have occurred. If your email is part of any public compromises that have occurred, you need to do two things. You need to, one, change your password for every account that uses that email address as your login mechanism. So let's say you're using, Jamie@gmail.com, and I used jamie@gmail.com to create a Air Canada account, an Amazon account, an Apple account, etc., every one of those accounts, I now need to go and change the password for. Secondly, if I've used a different email, but the same password in other accounts, I also need to go change anywhere that password exists. And that, the obvious reason here, for example, is if I've got jamie@gmail.com and jamie@proserveit.com, and they both use the same password, you can guess that it's probably pretty easy for the criminals to say, oh, this jamie@gmail is probably this jamie@proserveit, therefore I'm going to try the same password. Oh, look at that, it got me in. So anywhere you have the same email or the same password used, you'll need to go and change the passwords. Any kind of changes to payroll or wires, suppliers, etc. Set up a procedure for this. So whether it's a verbal authentication or some other second way to actually just make sure that if someone's requesting a change in payment information, that it's being requested from the actual source versus someone that's impersonating the source. This happens quite a bit. So we obviously we should just take one extra step to verify anytime these types of requests happen. There's a very famous instance where this didn't happen in Edmonton with one of the schools there, where they were basically $20 million out because they paid, someone had updated banking information from a vendor who obviously wasn't the actual vendor, and all of that money went into the into cyberspace, so to speak. I think the second last one, change your default passwords. This is especially true for any IoT devices. And what's an IoT device? It's an Internet of Things device. What's an Internet of Things device? So I think technology is both a boon and a curse. All of us at our homes probably have many, many things that are connected to the internet, whether that's our Alexa devices or our Sonos phone or speakers, or our smart alarm systems, or etc. All of those things are Nest thermostats. All of those things are IoT devices, and they all have default passwords. And because they're all on the network and they're all on the internet, they're actually a way that a criminal can get into your network. And for example, if you use Rogers and you've never changed the default password for your Rogers modem, what are the odds you think that a criminal could just, log into your modem remotely and use the default username and password, because all the default usernames are the same, it's admin. And if you haven't changed the password, you're effectively giving a criminal access into your home. And so this is why it's really important that we change all of the default passwords for any device that we connect to the internet. And finally, I won't talk very much about this, but it is a good idea to get your cybersecurity insurance, first and third party. I will let Blake speak about this, but basically this kind of concludes your actionable security list. And maybe I'll pause here. I haven't seen any new questions come in, but before I pass it back to Jay, any questions on the security checklist or items or any other things as it relates to cybersecurity that I can help with?
I'm not seeing any questions yet, but so many interesting things that you've put in there that I've been pwned, that, KeePass, One Secure, all of those, Internet of Things. So many people have these devices now. We don't really think about them. I've got my Roku sitting there that I don't think I've changed the password on.
Yep, Roku's a good example. The number one, the most important one for sure is your Bell, your Rogers, or whomever you use as your internet provider, is the password on that. If you haven't changed your provider or your modem in the last couple of years, many of these providers have actually changed their best practices so that when they come and set it up for you, assuming they set it up for you, they're trained to ask you what the password is and change it. But if you've had your modem for a while, chances are you probably have the default username and password. And again, you're just giving someone access effectively into your environment.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy, everything that's going on out there and all the things we need to do to stay protected.
Yep.
There's some more questions coming up now, Jamie.
Perfect.
Clients set up pods or packages of data so a hacker cannot access the entire data.
Yeah, it's I think there's some things that are like advanced that some people can do if you've got, so let's say maybe from a managed IT perspective, if you're working with a technical professional, there's some additional things I think you could do that might be more complex that would require assistance. You could do things like isolate data, like some technical things that would help. What I tried to do is make this checklist something that is as little technical as possible. So hopefully it's stuff that most of the people here on this phone would be able to do on their own, if that makes sense.
There's a whole bunch of other ones coming in. How do you feel about using OneDrive to back up client info?
OneDrive's great. So as an organization, I trust Microsoft very, very strongly in terms of whether they're going to protect our data. Obviously, the weakest link will always be us in terms of our passwords. But if you're storing data in OneDrive, I actually feel better about that than storing that information on your computer for a couple of reasons. One, it's backed up, and two, it's probably more secure than just on your device. The only comment I'd have is and in Canada, there's kind of gone are the days where people are worried about the Patriot Act and where data is stored, but there are Canadian data centers for that data, so a lot of those concerns have kind of gone away. So yeah, I feel pretty good about storing data in OneDrive.
Can you, the next question is, can you install firewalls to identify hackers before they do any damage?
Yeah, you can do all sorts of stuff, and I think that's the trick with security. It's like a black hole of money. You can spend a lot of money and continue to make yourself more secure. And that, for example, is one thing that we can do. And I think the easiest thing to do is this list, which it's for the most part, all of this is free or very, very inexpensive and cheap. And what you're trying to do is make it, again, cyber criminals are businesses. They want the highest return for the least amount of money or least amount of time. And so if you make yourself difficult to hack, they will more likely move on from you and onto somebody else. And so that's the idea. We want to do enough that we're making ourselves difficult, because the truth is there's probably nothing we can do to make ourselves impervious.
Right. Perfect. Okay, and the next question is, how do you recommend that we send or receive sensitive data to other parties?
That's a great question. And I think it probably depends on the type of data. So I'll say if it's regulated data, health information, credit card data, etc., there are guidelines and rules that, let's say, PCI or HIPAA will stipulate over how that data needs to be transferred. Probably the safest way is to do it verbally, and where to save it is in a, let's say a PCI or a HIPAA compliant system. Short of that, I will say that we want to avoid sending the information in an email in clear text. Those things can be intercepted and just plain read. So yeah, usually we want to look for some more secure fashion to do that. And I'll say that's a specific recommendation will probably depend on the unique scenario, but yeah, use a system that's built for that.
Thank you.
There's a good question here from Holly. She asks about the Have I Been Pwned site, and she asks, is by typing in my email address, or when I type in my email address, doesn't it collect the email addresses too?
It does, yeah. I mean, it's obviously going to know that you searched for yourself. The question is how valuable is that data? The fact that you have an email address and because there's nothing to connect that email address to you as an identity. And the truth is, it's probably very easy to figure out what your email address is, either via Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, etc. So I'm obviously at the end of the day, do what you feel comfortable with. I don't want to recommend ever doing something that makes you feel uncomfortable. That tends to be a really good litmus test, if you will. If you don't feel good about it, don't do it. And so if you don't feel comfortable putting your email address into that website, no problem at all. I'll just tell you what I feel comfortable with. I tend to feel fairly comfortable with with that site. I'm not giving any sensitive data. I'm just typing in my email address, and it will return whether that email address is part of a database.
Great, thanks, Jamie. What about how do you feel and how safe are home keyless entries, which are controlled by applications or like apps?
I think like everything, it depends on what you're using. There are, let's say higher invested ones like Ring, for example, from Amazon, which has a lot of financial backing. They spend a lot of money on it, but I mean, at the end of the day, nothing's perfect. So you always need to balance the convenience or with security. I think in general they're okay, but they are a target. And I've seen a number of instances where people use those types of devices to gain entry and access into your house, for example. I don't have one in my house from a remote lock perspective. I do have a ring, but I don't have an automatic lock. Yeah.
Perfect. The next question, Jamie, is how do you change the default passwords on modems and routers?
I would say if you can Google it. It would be the quick thing. Most of the telcos have FAQs on how to change the passwords and log in. And most of them publish what their default password is. So if you try to log in with the default password and it doesn't work, that's good news in one sense, in that you probably aren't using the default password. It's probably bad news in that you can't change it to something that you'd like. And then, so I recommend then calling your service provider.
Perfect. The next question is, if someone broke into my house, there would be penalties. What steps are being made to increase penalties to hackers to a greater extent, including but not limited to prisoners, jail time, and fines?
Yeah, I think the truth of the matter is, to be honest, it's bad news. There is a lot that goes into this, but it's a lot of stuff without real teeth. And not that it doesn't have teeth, but to be honest, someone that's trying to gain access to your system to scam you out of $10,000, and it's an individual, for example, because again, this is very cheap to do as an individual. That's not worth the amount of bureaucracy required to try and take that person to trial. Most of those organizations that are focused on that are looking at, like, let's say nation state attacks where China or so wherever, I don't mean to single them out, but any other country that's performing some cyber initiative against another country for malicious reasons, that's where most of those efforts go. So I find that it's still a bit of the Wild West from an inter-country cybercrime perspective, and that's mainly because it's the amount of country cooperation required to bring, some child in their basement executing a script to justice is just not worth it.
Perfect. Thanks, Jamie. OneDrive versus on-site servers, which would be considered more secure?
It depends, around how you set up your. There's pros and cons to both. There's some line of thinking that if you stick it in a OneDrive, at least there's a one-to-many, so to speak, target, versus if it's on your server, someone would actually have to actively go to your server and find it. But I think at the end of the day, generally speaking, OneDrive will be more secure than your server. And generally speaking, that's actually usually not the threat. The threat is your identity. And the question is, if someone got your username and password, would it matter if it's in OneDrive or on your server? It wouldn't, because again, you have the keys. And so that's what you need to protect. Not where the data is so much, but how you get access to the data.
Perfect, thanks. The next question is, can you offer a resource to read up on the Israel security methods?
I'll be honest, most of what we talked about would be under very strict NDAs. So I'm not sure that I'd be the best place to find that information. I hate to say this, but I'd say general research on the internet. I don't have a specific site I would point you to, but unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to, let's say, share stories and stuff. Much of it would be covered by NDAs.
Okay, thanks, Jamie. The next question is, what about a CRM and data protection there?
Great question. I think just in general, CRMs, most of them being cloud-based, it's the same advice. It's what's the account you're using to connect to it. So assuming that you're using a reputable CRM like a Salesforce or a Dynamics or a HubSpot or something like that, again, the weakest link will be your account. So as long as you have those security measures configured on your account, you're following the identity best practices, you should be good to go.
Perfect, thank you.
So we're at 10 o'clock here. I'm wondering if maybe this is time to say thank you to Jamie because we are of limited time today.
Perfect. Yeah, we can do that, Jay. I'll take note of the questions that we weren't able to address, and we can make sure that we get those that attended the answers that they were asking.
Exactly, and we'll probably have a little bit more time after Blake is done. So maybe we could just keep note of the unanswered questions here, and if there's time, we can address them there as well.
Sounds good.
So Jamie, thank you so much. Everything that you gave us was an awesome start. I know in that topic, it's just really breaking, like you were just cracking the surface of everything that there is to cover. It's a really, really huge conversation. And really, you know, the point today is that for all of us, is that there are relatively easy ways of dealing with these things, and that's the key, right? You gave some great tips earlier. I have a great team, and I'll talk about a little bit about that a bit later, and they're very low cost to me. But okay, so we've been hit and our client data has maybe been compromised. What do we do about that? So next up is Blake Waddell. And most of us already know Blake as a great group benefit advisor. We see and hear from him all the time on the Slack channel. He's also an avid cyclist and skier. Blake is the president of Waddell Group of Companies and one of the co-founders of National Group Benefit Meeting Series. What many of you do not know is that he is just as adept at providing advice about property and casualty insurance. In this presentation, Blake will review some options to protect you, your business, and your family with cybersecurity coverage. And just like Jamie, Blake likes his presentations to be conversational, so please keep your questions coming, and we'll try and stay on top of them. And Blake, the screen is yours. Blake, can see your screen, but we can't hear you. At least I
Okay,
can't.
sorry. I'm here now. Thank you.
There you go, and I can hear you.
Yeah, well, thanks very much. I thought I would just keep this kind of very short and brief, so please ask any questions, but I'll just give kind of a very high level of kind of what cyber insurance is and what it does. But to be very clear, this should be a very last resort. By the time you need to use cyber insurance, it's already way too late. So you should really be looking at making sure you never have a claim versus needing to rely on cyber insurance as your go-to response for any types of cyber incidences. So why do you need a cyber insurance policy is pretty basic. To protect your key assets in the event of a breach, so you need key coverages that are first party, which are your damages, and third party, which are other people's damages. So under first party would be kind of value of the lost data or equipment. So if you have equipment that you end up being unable to restore, it'll actually pay for that. Business interruption costs, which we're pretty lucky that we're, for the most part, not going to lose any business as long as we're not down for too long. It depends how complex your systems are and your ability to get back up and running. Notification and monitoring, which I think for insurance brokers is going to be a key one. If you think of how many individual data you have on each people, you get someone with a group of 50 companies, and let's say you average 50 employees per company, you're talking 2,500 people. If you have a breach, you have to notify and offer creditor monitoring too. So it can get pretty expensive pretty quickly. It's going to pay for the extortion. So if you end up having to pay a ransom demand, most cyber insurance policies will cover that. And then if you need to try to restore your reputation, it will do that as well. As well as one of the biggest ones that people don't realize is that you got to do a full system sweep and make sure whatever came into your system is no longer there. And that can be thousands or tens of thousands of dollars just to make sure that you don't restore everything, you're back up and running, and 24 hours later, you're back into another breach because you never got rid of that original virus. And the third party cost, which can easily be regulatory fees. We don't really collect a whole lot of other people's money, so bank fees and credit card fees shouldn't be a huge concern to us. Legal defense fees are pretty critical. If someone has their data compromised that you store and they end up suing you, your typical liability policy won't respond. You'll need a cyber policy in order to respond. As well, if there's any privacy commissioner fees. And you can see my little disclaimer at the bottom that every policy is different. So make sure that you've had your policy reviewed and you understand what your policy is actually going to respond to and cover. And so these are just a couple of screenshots that you never want to wake up in the morning to find, but what happens is a lot of times they'll deploy these at 2, 3 in the morning. And as Jamie said, with kind of over 200 days from the time you're infected until the time that things are deployed, is a lot of times it's way too late. If you've got 3 backups, but they've got access to all those backups, they're going to learn your system. And you'll think, oh, this is great, I've got these backups, and all the backups might be compromised as well. We had a client once who still did the old backups on they were almost like VHS tapes. And luckily the tape ejected out of the system automatically at 12 a.m. and at 3 a.m. the attack started. So they were able to restore it only because they were using kind of old school technology that almost nobody uses anymore. So make sure your backups are housed separately and they don't have access to them all the time. Maybe if it jumps on, backs up for 2 hours, and then you sever the tie to that backup until it comes up again. And so really when I talk about cybersecurity and insurance, you don't have to be the fastest, you just have to outrun the slowest. So you think when you're trying to run away from a bear, just want to make sure you're faster than the slowest person. These people are trying to get as many breaches as they possibly can get. So if you're 10 times harder than the guy next to you, they're not going to spend the extra 6 hours to get into your system. They're going to go to the next person and try to get into their system in 20 minutes and then the next one in 20 minutes. You got to remember, no system is perfect, but you just want to be better than the next one. So the two that really come to mind for me is, you might remember quite a few years ago, the CRA was hacked. And it was by a teenager who wasn't even trying to steal data. He was just curious about how secure their system was. And when you get teenagers that are able to hack the CRA, it's pretty safe to say that a lot of people's systems are always going to have holes, no matter how much money you spend. And another interesting one I find is Wasaga Beach. If you ever Google Wasaga Beach cyber breach, they had, I think it was about 7 or 8 servers that were caught up in ransomware. And they decided as a city it wasn't worth it to pay the ransom for all the servers. So they only bought back about 4 or 5 servers and just lost all of their other data. So if big cities don't have the proper protocols, smaller businesses are also going to have a much harder time. And so the key reasons to buy cyber insurance is the rapid growth in attacks, as you saw on Jamie's slide earlier. We hold a lot of personal identifiable information. And a few years ago, the government changed where we now have to report breaches to basically a cyber czar, and we need to notify everybody and offer them credit monitoring. And it's a real big deal and can have a huge reputational cost. And the other thing with, I know a fair number of the brokers on the line, is a lot of people in the group benefit business might have 1 or 2 clients that are 20 to 40 or 50% of all of their revenue. So you have one of those clients have their data's breached, they might leave you. So it might be a huge, huge burden to you financially if you don't properly protect people's data. And we also hold a fair bit of information on these companies as well. Quite often you'll know kind of all the CFO, president, and of all the job titles and everything. So it's really important you take proper steps to protect yourself.
Blake, there's a question here. It says, business interruption is usually a separate coverage from cybersecurity. With a hack, ransomware can disrupt business and create costs. Which protection pays the losses?
So your standard business interruption typically will not cover a cyber breach. You would need a cyber policy with a cyber interruption. So if you think of your standard business interruption would be more so if a car drove into your business and you couldn't operate anymore, it's going to exclude pretty much any electronics. And so you'd pick it up, you'd actually have 2 business interruption policies, one under your standard property policy and another one under your cybersecurity that would both respond to different instances.
Perfect, thanks. That's the only question. Oh, no, I'm just kidding. So to go along with that comment and question, it says, is it an actual exclusion?
Yeah, like right in the policy, it will exclude any electronics, any computers, and even just your standard property policy is probably going to exclude network and things of that nature. You need to buy a second policy to get that coverage.
Perfect, thank you. No more questions at this time.
Okay, perfect. Well, that was it. So let me Oh, I see we got one
I'm
more.
just kidding. Yeah, there's another one. How much does cybersecurity insurance cost?
Yeah, so that's a very open-ended question, but I mean, you can get packages if you're a very small shop. You can get packages that are as cheap as $500-600 a year, and probably on average, you're probably looking somewhere between kind of 1,200 to 1,500 if you're a smaller business. But I mean, you can obviously go up to well over 100,000 if you're a large business with pretty complex systems and options.
Blake, I have the cybersecurity package that came with my Advocates E&O insurance, and that's $250,000. Is that a decent amount to have, or should I really be talking to my other insurance folk about getting more?
It's probably a sufficient amount to have. The question I would have back to you is how broad is the coverage? Because a lot of times, a lot of those throw-in coverages aren't nearly as broad as your standard policy. The example I always like to use is a lot of people say, look, I've added on the home-based business rider, so I'm covered for liability. And I say, yes, you are, but only at your home. So if you're out at a client's property, if you're out at an event and something happens and you get sued, you don't have any coverage. So it depends how broad the coverage is.
So first of all, your screen has gone black, so that might be purpose. Maybe do you have some sort of document? You talk about broad range of coverage, or what exactly does it include? Do you maybe have some sort of tip sheet that you could put up on our LinkedIn site, and then people could take that and bring it to whoever they're currently using for their insurance, or they could turn it around and buy from you?
Yep, I can put something together that we can throw up on LinkedIn.
Fabulous. Any other questions? I'm not seeing any so far.
There's no questions,
So
but we have the video to play.
that's true.
There is a question.
There is one more question, and then I'll introduce the video. And Blake, you're going to play the video, right?
Yeah.
Perfect. So the question from Chantel is, the endorsement to the Advocates One at 250K may not include cybercrime. I was told. I've got a quote from Coalition, but do you recommend a carrier policy?
There's quite a few really good ones. It kind of depends on what you're doing and what the key coverage is. For example, if they don't include cybercrime, one of the huge cyber claims we've started seeing, which Jamie touched on with that $20 million payment, is once your emails are hacked, they'll wait, and when they see that you've got a big payment coming up, they'll send you the banking info. And if you don't actually call and confirm or have some type of verbal cue, it actually voids the policy. So it really depends kind of what's contained in the policy. Coalition's a great company. We do a lot of business with them, and Ascent would be another company that we do. Probably between the two of them, we would do over half of our cyber policies with. And another big thing is if you have employees, employee theft is a critical one to make sure you have covered, as well as that typically isn't covered by a very standard policy.
So when you say employee theft of data.
Or more importantly, money. So if an employee steals from you, your standard policy is probably not going to cover that. You typically need to buy a second endorsement to make sure that's covered.
Interesting. Yeah, as much as we spend all of our time talking about group benefits, you can go down any one specific type of insurance hole and just keep on digging and digging, and there's just more that you need to do and more that you need to know.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we've got this video from Gavin that I'll air here. And for those who don't know Gavin, he's a former Canada Life rep. He's now a group agent, and he had a breach, I guess, probably about 6 months ago. And he's put together his little story. And full disclosure, he said in a story that I asked him to, this was Jay's great idea to put Gavin in this uncomfortable position that we're so glad he was able to be put in. So I will air this video, and we'll come back and finish up the questions after.
Hi, everybody. My name is Gavin Mosley. I'm a group benefits consultant here in Ottawa, Ontario. Some of you may know I went through one of the most embarrassing points in my career earlier this year when I suffered an email breach. And my good buddy Blake decided to call me up this week and ask me to tell my story to all of you, which really isn't fun for me. But If it helps you avoid the mistakes that I made and really help better protect yourselves against this really important issue, I'm happy to share, as humbling as this is. So I can certainly take you through what happened, and maybe if I had to go back in time, what would I do differently? So I'm sorry I can't be there in person today. I've got other commitments, but yeah, happy if you share this video. So just to get into my story of dealing with an email breach, no excuses, but at the time I had a 2-month-old at home. We were getting no sleep, and I was just trying to go way too fast. And I was waiting for a document from a supplier. It was late. I was looking for this email, and an email came in replying to my original email saying, "Here are the documents for your review." And I said, perfect, finally, click, 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 and there's no documents. And I said, oh my God, what did I click? And as I looked closer, it was the label of the person that I was emailing, but it was from a different weird email address. So their email was being spoofed. So when an email address is being spoofed, it means the email is not coming from that person. It's just being labeled as if it was coming from that person. So it's coming from somewhere completely different. But they had copied and pasted our original email trail. So this email looked real. It wasn't a blank email. And so I clicked it open and I said, oh my God, I clicked something malicious. And I've always had McAfee antivirus, kind of off the shelf, came with the laptop. I'm running this thing upside down and sideways. It's finding nothing. I'm looking stuff up online. There's nothing there, and nothing happened. So I just kept going, and everything seemed to be fine. And I used Google G Suite, which I was told was one of the best ones out there for security. So I just thought to myself that everything was okay, and it got caught. Lo and behold, 2 weeks later, my email was spoofed, and an email went out to everybody that I had emailed in the last 2 years since opening up that email address. So it's like this hacker got into my sent box and took real email strings, copied them into a new email from some other weird email address, and sent that to my client with a cryptic message like, look at this document, something like that, with a malicious attachment. And once we found this, the good news of all this is that it wasn't a virus that looks for credit card numbers or tries to get personal information. They're actually trying to steal your computer's CPU computing power. And so when you have this virus, your computer runs really hot and really fast. And what they're doing with your computing power is helping them mine cryptocurrency somewhere, wherever they are in the world, because it takes a lot of computer energy, and they otherwise have to build large computer warehouses of servers and computers to mine cryptocurrency. So these hackers have developed these viruses to infiltrate personal computing devices, whether it's phones, whether it's computers. This one actually only attacked computers, one that I had. And I did actually notice in that 2-week interim, I said, geez, my computer's running really hot. And it was lagging here and there. And I said, isn't that weird? And so anyway, that day that first spoof email went out was a disaster. My phone, I had a full day of meetings. My phone was blowing up in between. People were phoning me. I could just see my inbox ticking up when I was on these Zoom meetings. And I've had, a couple hundred emails of about, a third of them were, let's call it my high-tech clients saying, hey, you got hacked. We got this weird email. We caught it right away. Just letting you know. And then the next third was, hey, got something weird from you. This isn't usually like you. Is this real? Or they'd be phoning me. Hey, you emailed me something. And then the other third that I got back was, hey, I clicked open your attachment, but there was nothing there. What were you trying to send me? And so I had to respond to everybody. And we're talking everybody that I ever emailed, prospects that didn't work out, acquaintances, friends, family, ex-clients. Like, this was really tough in terms of what to do. And so shameless plug, but I'm a subscriber to the My Friendly Lawyer service, unlimited access to legal, and they've got a program just for this. They paired me up with this wonderful paralegal who was basically assigned to me for this whole thing, and so basically from there, this person took me through the process top to bottom, educated me that of the seriousness of this, that did you know, Gavin, you need to submit a breach report to the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada. I said, really? And they said, oh yeah, this is really, really serious stuff when it comes to business emails. And so I had to do that. And I had to be very forthright in emailing everybody back that I emailed, and steps to take, and and talking to these people as well of other IT experts. The best practice was for people that were compromised, that did click open my attachment, to offer them a free cleanse of their machine, to do a remote diagnostic, to do an antivirus check, and to offer them a year of identity theft protection just in case. And so whether I took, not that I do take credit cards in our dealings, but if doesn't matter apparently. So and enter My Friendly Lawyer, because they offer that too for under $5 a month. So that really saved me versus going to Equifax Direct and buying it for $20 a month. So I ended up buying a laptop diagnostic and cleaning, a year of identity theft protection, and for anybody that clicked it open, then through the mix, through MIT Consulting, who's the consulting company I used, ended up buying a new laptop. We migrated email from G Suite to Office 365. BlackBerry Silence is a AI-driven antivirus, and Barracuda email protection is one of the best-in-class services that I now subscribe to, which are much more dynamic and much more robust than, say, off-the-shelf McAfee antivirus, apparently. So those are the new products that I've equipped myself with. I've sent probably 6, 7, 8, 9 emails to everybody that was affected. I end up changing email addresses for my clients through this, just that they can identify if future spoofs come out, because the spoofers sent 3 emails total, once every 2 weeks. And so every 2 weeks they'd send a new one. Then everybody would call me back again. You've been hacked again, but with an email spoofing, nothing's coming from your server email address. It's just being made to look like that. So anyway, it was incredibly taxing time-wise, emotionally, and as much as I try and be a perfectionist, it certainly brought me back down to earth in a number of ways. And so very, very humbling. I didn't, knock on wood, I didn't lose any clients over it. I didn't think I gained any either, but that said, I did try and get in front of it, and I did try and offer services and do the right thing. And I did get people saying, "Wow, you're really going above and beyond." I get these all the time, and you're the only one who's done this. So I think I did, strengthen a bit of trust with some people. But anyway, so that's the story. I hope it helps some of you. Here's some of the products I'm using. And if anybody ever wanted to reach out to me one-on-one just to see what I did or what I said in emails, I don't mind sharing further. So thank you, Blake, for asking me to tell this horrific, embarrassing story. But if it does help other people out there, that would be my hope. Anyway, sorry again, I can't be there today, but take care. Bye-bye.
So that was Gavin's experience. And what's ironic with cyber insurance is once you've had a breach, it's way, way tougher and more expensive to buy. And we always say to the insurance companies, you're now getting a risk that's gone through all of this. They have the best systems and protocols, way better than before, but they still make it really difficult for you to purchase it after you've had a breach. So the way this is kind of our business mantra too, is I used to watch the show Frasier when he was first interviewing Daphne, and he said, "What's the best way to get a ring out of a coffee table?" And I can't remember her answer, but the answer he was looking for was to use a coaster. And it's so much cheaper, so much better to deal with this before you have a breach. As Jay's going to mention, it's not a lot of money to set yourself up for success early on. And the more you do now before you have a breach, the way cheaper and better it's going to be in the long term. So back to you, Jay.
Yeah, thanks, Blake. Yeah, that message from Gavin, I spent many phone calls with Gavin after he was breached, and boy, was he in pain. Never mind on top of being exhausted because he had brand new twins. My heart went out to him. So in my world, I use something called managed IT. Now, if you have a great IT company with lots of different people who can help you when you need help, great. You'll have the now, from everything you've learned today, you have the knowledge to ask them some of the more detailed questions to ensure they're being proactive and they actually have the ability to help you when you need it. However, if you're somebody who only has a person to call, if you break down, you should start looking for a full service company that has multiple people with different abilities who can be proactive to help you ensure you have the systems that you need. There are lots of managed IT companies out there. I personally worked with 3 of them. I have some clients who also own managed IT companies, some friends who do. One of the ones that I know, if you use Mac in your office, they're far and few between. So one of the ones that I know of, Calgary-based, they're Mac specialists. Feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn. The price range for these things are massive. Don't just shop on price. I mean, I've seen some managed IT companies that are down in the $25 per computer per month range. And yeah, you know what? Managed IT at $25, you're probably going to get more protection than just if you have a break fix guy, meaning that if your computer breaks down, you call a number and somebody shows up to fix your computer. You're probably going to be better at that $25 option, but do your research. There's some fabulous options at $100 per month. And in my last company, before I had Naviguide, I had 5 assistants helping me out. And with the amount of data that we had, I splurged. I paid $2,500 a month. And I did not lose a wink of sleep with that company. They were amazing, incredibly proactive. And in theory, if I'm ever ransomware or if any of these things happen to me, these guys are on it in seconds, and everything just gets shut down and I get restored. So I hope I never have to test the theory. I hope I put my coaster in place properly. If you don't have cyber insurance, call Blake, call your E&O provider, call your current P&C broker. You now have the questions to ask. If you learn anything along the way that you want to share, if you have any good or bad experiences or stories, feel free to post them on the NGBM LinkedIn site. Our goal is to try to make that page a positive experience and more useful for all visitors. Also, put it up on the CGIB site, on the Slack channel. So many people are following that every day, and it's a super important piece of information. So do we have any remaining questions? The last one I see is from Gordon. He's gone, but he said that this happened to him and he actually ended up being blacklisted in a lot of places. And it was a lot of work to get his blacklist undone. So I don't think there's any more questions. Lindsay, Blake, do you know of any last questions that I don't see?
No, I think you're good. There was a couple we didn't get to earlier, but I think that we can just take those offline and make sure we get the answers to those that attended.
Okay, so Jamie, if you're still here, thank you so much. Blake, thank you so much for what you've done for us. And to all of you who joined us today, thank you for joining us. So our next session is going to be in September. That section will be one of our question and answer sessions. Start thinking of some great questions or problems that you're having so that everyone can learn something interesting in those sessions. If you know of anybody else who wants to see this presentation, it has been recorded and it will be on our YouTube channel. Blake, can you tell everybody how they get that YouTube link if they want it?
We'll put it later today on the YouTube link right onto our LinkedIn channel, so you can link right to it.
Perfect. So on behalf of Lindsay Gibson, Blake Waddell, and myself, Jane Adler, thank you for joining us today, and please keep your eye open for our next session. It'll likely be in September, and we wish you a great summer, and we'll see you on Slack. Bye, everybody.